Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out for the thrilling conclusion of Karen Auvinen's year-long writers' workshop. For those who, I think most of you know, but a few of you might not. For years, Fishtrap has offered a year-long writers' workshop where the program starts with a week at Summer Fishtrap and then is followed by a year of distance learning and lands with the conclusion at a second Summer Fishtrap. I don't know if other programs around the world or the country do this, but it's really unique. We always get the greatest instructors and people who are telling themselves, man, maybe this is the year that I write that book, or I wish I had the time and support to complete that manuscript that I've always wanted to do. And so some of you have been through the program, some of you are just launching into the program, some of you have wanted to do it for years. Many people who go through the program finally get something. It's the sustained support from your instructor, and we just think it's really cool. If any of you are curious about doing this who haven't, I think most of you out there have been a part or are starting in the year-long program, but we'll start applications for next year in November. But for now, we're going to celebrate what's happened with you folks who've been in the program this year. So I'm just going to toss it. This is Karen Auvinen's second time through the year-long program. So she is a veteran, and we always love having her around, and I'm excited to hear what you folks have come up with. So take it away, Karen. Give her a hand.
Somebody has scrawled Fishtrap here, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, so thank you, and thank you for coming. I want to say that this group that I've worked with this year, they're small, but they are mighty. All of them have done incredible work, as you will hear. We have 2 readers in person, and then I will read a third person, an excerpt from a third person who's been Zooming in with us. So. And I also want to say that 2 of them loved it so much that they've made a pledge to return next year to do something different. So yay, Fishtrap. I'm really so proud of the work that they've done as humans, because we all know that the book is a journey, and as writers. And I think you will really be wowed by what you're going to hear today. Okay, our first reader is Jacqueline Courteau. She is an ecologist, researcher, and consultant. She splits time between Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she is restoring 10 acres of woods and wetlands, and the Ozarks, where she helps care for her elderly father. She squirrels acorns, grows oaks, and is trying to grow all 12 of Michigan's native oak species in her own backyard. She enjoys hiking and swimming with her Newfoundland Wally, and she will be reading from her collection of essays with the working title Meander Survey. Please welcome Jacqueline.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Karen so much for that sustained support, advice, wisdom, cheerleading, nudging, pushing, whatever was needed. It's been a great year. And a shout out to our cohort again, small but mighty. We really had a nice community of support. And then also a brief shout out to my other writing support group, which we've had a whole chain migration thing going on here with Fishtrap. So the first of us, Tamara, did the year-long last year, and I looked at what she was doing, and I said, I want what she's having. So I signed up, and now my friend Katie is doing it this coming year. So that's 3 of us, and then Lisa also joined us just for a 1 week as well. So Fishtrap, I think we might need a nod here for the publicity we're getting. The essay I'm going to read is it's a condensed version of a longer meditation on mushrooms. This is called Mushrooms and a Mother's Love. When my friend Sarah died, I lamented that she did not leave a verbal legacy for her son, my godson Cal. I tried to keep her memory alive for him with stories and photos, but 17 years after her death, I still felt at a loss for words when I headed into the woods with him the first Sunday in May. Calvin now, was taking a break from his AmeriCorps job to help with my field biology research that day. I was still getting used to him as a sturdy young man rather than the forlorn kid whose mother died of breast cancer when he was 5. He was already taller than me when he finished high school and had stretched up to 6 feet and filled out while away at college. He had the same sprinkle of freckles across his nose that Sarah had, but with his father's shock of black hair rather than her carrot ginger locks. "I hope we find some morel mushrooms," Calvin said. "I've never found any before." I was surprised. Calvin had spent a lot of time outdoors. He camped with the Boy Scouts, canoed with his dad, constructed a park boardwalk as his Eagle Scout project. On his final high school scouting trip, he helped rescue a man struck by lightning along the Appalachian Trail. Spring sun streamed through large red oaks, barely bursting their buds. The following Sunday would be Mother's Day. I hadn't been thinking of that, though, when I asked Calvin to join me for a field day, only that it was trillium time. I was studying those charismatic spring wildflowers. Finding edible mushrooms would be a bonus. Recent rain softened the leaf litter on the forest floor, raising a moist, earthy aroma. You could almost smell mushrooms in the air. Let's hope they're out. This is around the time I've found them. Lore is that you look for morels when the emerging baby oak leaves are the size of mouse ears. I whispered a quick prayer under my breath to Mother Nature. Show us your wonders. Calvin carried the weightiest equipment. I carried the weight of memories. I hadn't thought of a particular message to share. We stopped to count trillium on a steep hillside plot. We chatted about Calvin's job and volunteer work, scrambling up Lake Michigan sand dunes to survey for hemlock woolly adelgids, writing an environmental position paper for a local politician. He had just been accepted into a master's program in environmental policy. Your mother would be so proud of you, I said. Sarah and I had forged a close friendship in the tender ferocity of new motherhood. Both newlyweds, new homeowners, and neighbors, we met just before our first pregnancies. We nursed each other through sleepless nights, toddler tantrums, miscarriages a month apart. Our second pregnancies intertwined. Our babies were due 3 days apart, 9 months after Sarah and her husband had invited me and my husband for a 4th of July weekend at their Lake Michigan cottage. Sarah asked me to be Calvin's godmother. I wasn't sure how to be a godmother, and I wasn't a Baptist like she was, so I acted like an aunt, going to piano recitals, sports events, and his Eagle Scout ceremony. But I also invited him into my place of worship, the Cathedral of Nature. Knowing he loved the outdoors, I offered him a summer field assistant position when he was in high school. His dad took him to nature for scouting, but I shared the scriptures, teaching him about trees and wildflowers. Sarah had been diagnosed with breast cancer when Cal was a year old. Rigorous treatment sent the malignancy into remission. Scans were clear at her 3-year milestone. But a year later, when Cal was 5, the cancer exploded back, a silent bomb, sending shrapnel far beyond the initial target. Her bones became brittle and broke. Her brain was pervaded by lesions. Physical and psychological pain were her days. Sarah fought hard, unwilling to accept that she might die. She never fully overcame her own father's death when she was 6, which made her especially terrified of leaving her children motherless. After more surgery and chemo and rehab, the options were exhausted. I researched hospice facilities that could offer peace and calm, but when she left the rehab center, She went home. She just wanted to be with husband John and her boys. For several weeks, there was a lull. Things seemed almost normal. She couldn't climb stairs and needed help around the house, but she was present when the boys came home from school. She and their little family went on short outings to our old neighborhood, her mother's house, her childhood home. Sarah treated me to a facial and a massage at her favorite spa to thank me for supporting her through treatment. We stopped at a cafe afterwards. I struggled for words. Finally, I just blurted out, "Sarah, if there's any message you want me to hold for you to tell the boys when they get older, I will do that." Shock reddened her face like a slap. Acknowledging death meant acquiescing to it, maybe even hastening it. Sarah's mouth tightened, her voice constrained. I don't remember her exact reply, but I do remember this. She offered no words, no message for the future, no legacy for me to safeguard. 2 weeks later, John called on a Friday afternoon. Sarah had taken a turn for the worse. Home hospice had been called. I went as soon as I could. I offered to stay the night, sleep on the couch near her while John tended the kids. Hospice arrived and delivered a hospital bed. I sat with Sarah, taking notes as the hospice nurse talked. When the nurse left, Sarah turned to me. "You know how you said you would take a message for the boys?" "Yes." "I want to do that." I picked up notepad and pen again. "What do you want to say?" Her voice faltered. "I'm not sure just yet. Let's do it tomorrow." That night, she fell into a deep sleep. She startled awake briefly when 5-year-old Cal came downstairs at midnight, his fluting little boy voice piercing the quiet. She sat up, looked at him. "You should be in bed," she said, not a scold, but a lilt of love. His daddy brought him close for a goodnight kiss. Those were the last words Sarah spoke. She slept through that night. She woke fitfully the next day, but was unable to talk. Saturday night, her sleep slumped into a coma, which deepened toward death as morning came. She died Sunday afternoon. The words had been on the tip of her tongue. What would she have said? What message could I share with her boys when they got older? I wrestled with words over the years. I told Calvin about her beautiful apple pies and her love of dragonflies, of winter blue sweaters and copper roses. I texted photos of recipe file cards in her neat blue ballpoint script. It was harder to convey how she was like the Kathy comic strip woman who does everything more beautifully than you, but also a lost soul, the scar of losing her father never fully healed. On that spring day, though, in the woods, as we climbed uphill from the first plot, I was focused on work rather than words. "Hey, look, isn't that a morel?" Calvin spotted it first. Peeking through the leaf litter, a creamy white stem showed off a brown shirred sheath, its glistening folds translucent in the sun. "Cool, why don't you pick it?" Excitement eclipsed ethical harvest. Finding a morel feels like panning for gold and glimpsing a glittering flake. Morels are the most delicate of mushrooms. I couldn't wait to saute it and savor that special flavor, a taste of earth made tangible. The tender stalk came up easily in Calvin's hands. We admired the dainty honeycomb ridges covering the cap, the Yoda-like furrows. I placed the mushroom atop my clipboard and carried it carefully. The scent wafted while we walked toward the next plot. Soon after, we saw another. I noticed this one first, darkening with age, gnarled, drooping. We picked it anyway. Balancing both mushrooms on my clipboard, I remembered. I have a net bag in the car. Let me get it. Mushrooms shed tiny spores when they mature, which might already be sprinkling invisibly from the mushroom's gills when you pluck it. Picking spurs more spores to spill. Net bags allow those spores to scatter where they might grow rather than going to waste in a container. As I hurried back to the car, I was amazed to find more mushrooms. Many people scout for morels in public parks. You have to be in the right place at the right time to get ahead of the crowd. I rushed to gather them because if I didn't, someone else would. But then I remembered honorable harvest. Don't pick the first, don't pick the last. Pick only what you will use. Ask permission. Calvin and I had just been discussing robin wall kimmerers braiding sweetgrass, which describes these principles beautifully. I had netted 6 more morels when I returned to Calvin. Together, we found several more. Calvin usually spied them first. We pondered what it meant to ask permission. When the mushroom comes up easily, I said, it's giving permission. If it resists, leave it. We picked a few, left a few. Together, we gathered 15 mushrooms that day, my best morel harvest ever. As we marveled over this treasure, I remembered another kimmerer nugget. What if nature loves you? These mushrooms offered an answer. Mother Nature would show us her wonders, would give us her gifts. I asked and I received so that I could share the bounty and the magic. Sarah was not an outdoor enthusiast. She cooked mushrooms, but I never saw her forage for them. I'm not sure she would have recognized morels if she had seen them. Still, these mushrooms carried a message of motherly love. As Calvin and I headed home, still awed at our harvest, I realized that this was the legacy I could offer from Sarah. I didn't need her words. I didn't need a special message. What I had to share was a mother's love, to share what I loved, to share love and from Mother Nature. Love was the legacy from Sarah, from Mother Nature, through me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I love that piece. It's so beautiful. Our next reader is Sarah Carter. She's a hospital physician, outdoor adventurer, and former professional cellist. She began writing in 2020 as a way to try to process her experiences as a frontline health worker during the COVID pandemic, and had her first essay published in the New England Journal of Medicine. She lives in Vancouver, Washington with her partner Joel and their 3 unbelievably cute and adorable dogs, 2 of whom I've met this week. And Sarah, this is an excerpt from her memoir, her completed memoir, How to Keep a Promise. Where are you? There you are. Welcome, Sarah, please.
I just want to say thank you to Karen for an amazing year. I knew nothing about Fishtrap. I had just read Karen's memoir, Rough Beauty, and had been kind of following her for a couple of years and saw that she was teaching this year-long workshop. So It has far exceeded my expectations. I never thought I would be able to write a first draft of a book, and I did. So it would not have been possible without all the support from Karen and from our group. So my memoir is kind of a journey of self-discovery from an early life that was very defined by a lot of external achievement and more of a pivot inward and sort of being able to listen to my own voice, with the key catalyst to that transition being a very beloved dog, Milo, who you will meet in this chapter. So yeah, this is kind of in the middle of the book, and here we go. I had a much-needed week of vacation early in the spring of my intern year and decided to take Milo backpacking. By this point, we'd done a few overnight camping trips, but this would be our longest multi-day adventure thus far. With it being so early in the season, there were limited destinations that would be free of snow and ice. After doing some research, I decided to hike the Rogue River, a 40-mile trail in southwestern Oregon. I borrowed a tent from a friend and planned out how much food I would need to carry and what other gear and supplies to load into my second-hand slate blue Osprey backpack. In previous years, I'd tried using 3 different dog backpacks with Milo, thinking he could probably carry some of his own food and water. But each time I attempted this, he ran off into the woods and somehow wriggled himself out of the packs despite a lack of opposable thumbs. I was never able to figure out how he managed to free himself, nor was I ever able to find said packs after he returned from deep in the woods, always with an impish glint in his eyes. I eventually gave up, not wanting to waste more money on gear that was destined to be abandoned, accepting my fate as Milo's lifelong food and water porter. We began our adventure on a drizzly afternoon after a multi-hour drive south from Portland. Google Maps led me off of I-5 to Foster Bar, a small cleared area at the far end of a grassy meadow, devoid of other people or cars. As I parked and let Milo hop out of the back seat, I had a moment of pause, emitting a small shiver as I felt the damp, cool air on my skin. Was this a safe thing to be doing on my own? A flicker of uncertainty crossed my mind, as well as a fleeting vision of a warm and cozy hotel room. I watched as Milo found the start of the trail, looking back at me expectantly. This is the way. His plume of a black and tan tail wagged excitedly. Seeing this, I felt a solid yes reverberate through my body. I hoisted my fully loaded backpack up and over my shoulders with a soft grunt, locked up the car, and placed the key in its designated hiding spot for the car shuttle, and set off down the trail. The Rogue River carries hikers through a variety of terrain, with some of the trail running close to the river and other sections rising high up along rocky ledges overlooking dramatic stretches of rapids. Shortly after we started down the trail, we ran into one fellow hiker moving in the opposite direction back toward Foster Bar, and he would be the only human we saw for the duration of the trip until we reached the trail's end at Grave Creek. I struggled in the first few hours on my feet. I noticed every twinge of discomfort. My neck and shoulders ached from my heavy pack, and my legs felt stiff after the long drive. I repeatedly imagined turning around and returning to the trailhead. Uncontrolled worries raced through my mind. Did I forget something? Would the car shuttle work out, and what if it didn't? Had I stashed the car key in the correct place? What if I got hurt? What if Milo got hurt? Did I pack enough food? What if I got us lost? What if? I trudged forward. We spent our first night in a secluded clearing next to a creek. Icy snowmelt babbling around smooth gray stones and running all the way down to the river. I set up our tent and changed into warm, dry clothes for the evening. As I sat on a log, waiting for my dehydrated vegetable curry to reconstitute in hot water, I appreciated a mild soreness in my legs, an indicator of an afternoon spent moving my body. I watched as Milo contentedly ate his dinner, a mix of kibble and freeze-dried lamb. He always ate methodically, never rushing through his bowl of food. As the minutes passed, the swirl of nagging anxieties that had consumed my consciousness for most of the day was replaced by a gentle, calm state of observation. I looked up at the shifting light in the sky as we transitioned from day to dusk. I sipped on bracingly cold filtered creek water out of a Nalgene bottle, relishing its clarity. And as I began to eat my curry, I watched Milo walk unhurriedly around the perimeter of our small camp, first lapping up some of the creek water, and then choosing a slightly elevated spot to lie down and keep an eye on our temporary home for the evening. As the sky darkened, the temperature also began to fall. I boiled a small cup of water for tea and packed away the garbage from my now-eaten pouch of curry. I pulled a down jacket out of my backpack and a well-worn pair of fleece pants. I unrolled my foam sleeping pad on the ground and laid atop it, staring straight upwards, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, one by one. Milo lay a couple feet away from me, continuing to keep an eye on our surroundings. The whir of my mind slowed first to a gentle whisper, then went completely still. My tight grasp on time loosened as I admired the blanket of stars overhead. Eventually, the nighttime cold seeped through my jacket, and I decided it was time to retire into the tent for the evening. I turned on my headlamp, brushed my teeth, and splashed a bit of creek water on my face, rubbing my eyes. I unzipped the door to the tent, replaced my pad under my sleeping bag, and crawled inside. Milo slipped in just behind me. I unclasped his collar and placed it in one of the tent's sidewall pockets, and he laid down on the small blanket I had brought for him, placed just next to my own. He let out a deep exhale as he settled in to rest. I nestled into my sleeping bag and turned off the headlamp, laying completely still. My mind remained in a state of deep tranquility. With relative ease, I finally experienced what I had previously attempted to force through years of meditation practice, an ability to be truly present, not looking ahead of or behind me. I felt a radical sense of calm, appreciating the radiating soft warmth where Milo's body pressed gently against my own. I listened to the steady sounds of his breaths as he slept, until also slipping into my own deep rest. My mother and I sat across a large desk facing a middle-aged woman. I stared at her short, tightly curled hair, her navy long-sleeved blouse dotted with pale pink lilies, the small clumps of black mascara clinging to the ends of her eyelashes, the straight maroon line painted across her thin lips. Sarah needs to be able to take more AP classes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but we just don't have any other classes available for her to take. I was a junior in high school and enrolled in the only 2 advanced placement courses offered at our public school in a small suburb an hour outside of Seattle. She's not going to be able to get into a good college without more AP classes. We are not going to be able to accommodate this request, and the extra courses are unnecessary anyway. Sarah's grades are good. She looked up at my mother, one eyebrow raised. Which colleges are you thinking of for Sarah? Sarah is going to go to Harvard, my mother said, not skipping a beat. I closed my eyes and slumped down into my chair, feeling my cheeks flush, wanting to melt into the floor below me, unseen. A prolonged pause ensued, and the counselor looked down at the papers in front of her, avoiding my mother's hawk-eyed stare. She cleared her throat softly. I'm sorry to tell you this, but Sarah isn't going to get into Harvard. Students from here don't go to places like Harvard. I closed my eyes, unsure of how to manage my embarrassment. What started as a thin ray of resolute energy emanating from my mother at the beginning of this ill-fated meeting now felt like a burgeoning lightning bolt, honing under pressure to a fine electrified point. I was intimately familiar with this rage. My daughter will get into Harvard, she snarled. And with that, she stood up, clutching her purse and coat, and walked out of the door. I followed her, eyes glued to the floor, wordless. We drove home in silence. A few weeks later, my mother told me I would be transferring to a different high school for my senior year, one with 4 AP classes I could take. I was a friendless high schooler whose hours outside the classroom were filled with classical music, practicing, lessons, performances. After being bullied throughout high school, I learned that my mode of survival was to remain as minimally noticeable as possible. I did all that I could to fit myself into a small, forgettable cube of existence. At my new school, I felt like a ghost, gliding alone through the hallways from class to class, quietly amassing straight A's, eating lunch alone in my car each day. Over the course of that autumn, I worked on my application to Harvard, completing it by hand, pouring all of my focus into the shape and form of each letter. I composed my 1-page personal statement about my brother, his autism diagnosis, the singular tender love shared with a sibling who needed a unique kind of attention and care. All of my hopes and dreams were wrapped up into this application. This was my ticket to winning my mother's love, to finally achieving peace. Once it was complete, I secured the pages together with a paperclip and carefully slipped everything into a priority mail envelope. Mom and I drove to the post office together. I handed the envelope to the postal worker, worst-case scenarios repeating on a loop in my head, images of the envelope lost in a dusty corner of the post office or mushed into a pulp on a wet sidewalk. "I guess we just wait now," I said nervously as my mom and I began our drive home. She nodded her head silently. In mid-December, a large envelope arrived in our mailbox on a sunny Saturday. My dad handed it to me with a look of eager anticipation. "I think a large envelope means good news, right?" I clasped it tightly in my hands, suddenly feeling like there wasn't enough air for me to breathe. I carefully unsealed the flap, fingers trembling, and pulled out its contents. My acceptance letter was on top. "Congratulations," it began. I read no further. "I got in," I whispered, and then I said it again, louder this time. "I got in." My mother cheered and clapped her hands together. My dad beamed, and elation filled our living room. That holiday season felt especially beautiful as my family and I rode the wave of joy well into the new year. My mother's dream for me had finally become a reality. I learned at the Rogue River that waking up next to my dog in a tent is one of the greatest pleasures in my life. Milo began to stir as soon as the sun rose the following morning. We were comfortably cocooned in warmth in our small tent. He turned his head upwards to look at me, and I gently scratched the wavy, soft fur behind his ears. We drifted in and out of sleep for a while longer before I decided to tend to the rumble of hunger in my stomach. Milo excitedly stood by as I fastened his collar and zipped open the tent door, and he bounded out into the open air, tail wagging. He whimpered with anticipation as I slipped on some thick socks and my jacket and fleece pants before exiting the tent. Once I got outside, he sidled up next to me, giving my cheek an excited kiss before heading to the creek for a drink of water and then sauntering off into the woods. I began heating some water for coffee and oatmeal. It occurred to me that I had no idea what time it was. I did not wear a watch, and I had my cell phone turned off and stashed somewhere deep in my backpack. It was morning, and that was all I really needed to know. I poured Milo's breakfast into his orange silicone bowl and watched him eat. I sipped on my bitter cup of instant coffee and stirred my piping hot cinnamon-laced oats. I felt my body start to come awake in the cool morning air after a full night of rest. After breakfast, I cleaned up our campsite and began packing up. As I rolled my sleeping bag into a tight cylinder, stuffed my sleeping bag into its small compression sack, and deconstructed the tent, I acknowledged the feeling of peace that emerged from knowing that all of my needed possessions for the time being could fit onto my back. As I hoisted my pack over my shoulders, Milo ran toward me, radiating an infectious, effervescent joy. As I adjusted the straps in the waist belt, he ran circles around me, then play-bowed, then let out a singular excited bark, and darted down the trail. Before my mind could generate any stories about what I might need to worry about that day, I set off after him. "What is it that you want, Sarah?" My breath hitched in my throat. "What do you think you need?" I did not know how to answer those questions. But instead of acknowledging the strangeness of not knowing, I turned toward a hard kernel of resentment that had taken root in my chest. "I'm not sure," I said, shrugging my shoulders, feigning indifference. The kind-eyed therapist nodded her head, seemingly waiting for me to elaborate. She had just listened to me describe a basic outline of my childhood. "I guess I want to, finish my degree, figure out what's next," I trailed off. "That doesn't really answer the question, though, does it?" A chasm of silence followed. I felt an aching lump in my throat, the threat of a wave of tears. During my senior year in college, a friend suggested that I try seeing a therapist after I disclosed to her that my mother and I had not spoken for most of the preceding 4 years. She had been so angry with me from the time I departed for Cambridge, at times getting to the point where she told me I was not allowed to call or visit. I could not make sense of her rage, but I silently accepted it and swallowed my own feelings. In this particular moment, therapy felt like the worst possible idea. I need to use the restroom, sorry. Glancing down at the floor and avoiding her gaze, I launched myself off of the seat and out the door. I ran down the hall and never looked back. It would be many years before I had the presence of mind to attempt therapy again, and even longer than that before I could truly begin to hear my own voice. As Milo and I continued our journey, we settled into an easy rhythm. Walk until we reach a beautiful spot, stop and have a snack and some water. Resume walking again. Stop at the next beautiful spot, snack, walk again. If and when the timing feels right, stop and set up camp for the evening. Go to bed when it gets dark. Wake up with the sun. Repeat. On one of our nights on the trail, we found ourselves in an idyllic, grassy meadow near the river's edge. I slipped off my pack, back damp with perspiration, captivated by the beauty of this spot. Aside from talking quietly with Milo, I had otherwise been silent throughout the trip, but I felt compelled to let out a loud whoop, and as I did so, Milo ran toward me, bouncing through the bright spring grass with glee. We ran large circles in the meadow together, eventually flopping down on the ground. The late afternoon sun warmed my entire body. I lay there until I noticed a slight tickling sensation on my abdomen. Peeking under my shirt, I found a tick crawling on my belly, and I flicked it off. I had seen an occasional tick in North Carolina, so I was relatively unconcerned. That evening, as I was rubbing Milo's belly and settling into rest in our tent, my fingers ran over a small lump in his fur. And then another, and then another. I switched on my headlamp and found a pair of tweezers in my first aid kit, removing and crushing the ticks one by one. Though I initially felt rather panicked, Milo was in a state of deep relaxation as I rubbed his skin from head to toe. I fell into my own meditative state, eventually removing 83 ticks in total. I placed the Ziploc bag with the crushed ticks outside of our tent door, checked us both one more time from head to toe, and then somewhat shockingly fell into a restful sleep. Perhaps subconsciously, I did not bring any reading or writing materials with me on this trip. I found myself simply sitting for long stretches, staring at the scenery around me, watching Milo, listening to the river, and allowing my mind to gently wander. Nearly 3 decades of unrelenting mental chatter finally began to subside, and I could feel a new sense of ease in my body, a fluidity to my movements, a deepening of my breaths. I started to listen to the most basic of internal cues. Was I hungry? Was I tired? Thirsty? What did I want or need? I keenly observed my beloved dog, who seemed completely in his element in the wilderness with me, attuned to all of his wants and needs. I watched him run down the trail following a scent, felt him trot closely behind me when he was worried about safety, bark assertively when bears got too close, eat when hungry, nap when tired, seek out water when he needed it. As I made these observations, a critical gap in my relationship with my own body and mind started to narrow, ever so slightly. We found a particularly stunning place to camp on our last night on the trail. A flat, cleared spot high up above the river, surrounded by towering Douglas firs. I had saved my favorite dehydrated meal, macaroni and cheese, for this final night. Milo also got a few spoonfuls on top of his kibble, which he relished, delicately chewing the pieces of pasta before finishing the rest of his food. I savored the last few squares of a dark chocolate bar I had nibbled on throughout the trip and sipped on mint tea as the sky began to grow dark. I left the rainfly off the tent that night, wanting to fully absorb a maximum amount of dazzling starlight. Gazing upwards, I began to wonder how the transition back to life off the trail would unfold. This trip had simultaneously shifted my perspective both inward and outward, and I did not want to lose sight of the lessons learned on the trail. I did not want to go back to the endless cycles of worry that so often ruled my consciousness. On our last morning, I spent a few extra moments in the tent in the rising dawn light, letting the feeling of deep peace settle into my bones, a kind of lasting souvenir I hoped could become an indelible part of my physical body.
So one of our members is in Texas, and we couldn't Zoom him in today, so I'm reading a piece from his book. His name is Mike Atzert, and whom I've affectionately been calling Captain Mike for 4 years. Mike Atzert is a retired professional pilot. For over 40 years, he flew many types of aircraft in a wide variety of missions, but now spends his time cycling, gardening, and writing. He has just a little intro here to this chapter. The title of his book is Border Flight, a Memoir. It covers a 5-year period in the late 1980s when he and his young family moved to Eagle Pass, a small South Texas border town. Mike had taken a corporate flying job with an oil and gas exploration company based on a ranch just outside of town. This reading is an excerpt from a chapter called Night Bloom. 1/2 mile from the runway threshold, Big Jim commanded, "Be ready, Mike." At touchdown, he emphatically stated, "Now." I squeezed the trigger and yanked the Learjet drag chute handle up. At 130 miles an hour, the effect was immediate and violent. I was pitched forward in my seat restraints. My shoulder straps dug into each collarbone. The lap belt forced my belt buckle into my pelvis. Jim stopped the jet on the short Eagle Pass Municipal Airport runway. I quickly released my co-pilot harness to exit the cockpit and the plane, with the engine screaming at idle thrust. I disconnected the chute from its aft fuselage, gathered it up, then jumped back into the plane before we taxied to a parking spot. We planned to return later that day after the fog had dissipated to take the Learjet back to the Wynn Ranch, our original destination. As our passenger, Mr. Morgan, exited the Learjet, a bit unsteady on the air stair, he quipped, "Fellas, that was something I didn't expect this morning. Thanks for the air show." We had flown Morgan in from Alexandria, Louisiana, for a David versus Goliath lawsuit consultation. Our company was suing a large national gas company for insufficient payment. Jim, polymath that he was, had developed the computer program that had detected the compensation shortfall, and because of his technical expertise, the company had started to emerge from its shoebox record keeping. The meetings, in which he was a material participant, ran longer than expected, so the return flight was delayed to early dusk. The Wynn Ranch runway was unlighted, but we had plenty of time to complete the flight before solid dark. We added a modicum of fuel, just enough to complete the 6-mile hop to the ranch with a minimum reserve. Because the municipal runway was woefully short, just 3,000 feet, we wanted to keep the takeoff weight as light as possible. February in South Texas can be cold, but that day the weather was shirt-sleeve temperature even as the sun dipped below the horizon. The slight haze gave the southwestern sky a rose glow. The dusky sky was clear. Venus was a tiny yet shimmering light. We roared down the runway like a dragster. Airborne, we immediately maneuvered to a left-hand visual approach pattern for runway Ranch 32. We circled toward the narrow asphalt ribbon. The haze became more pronounced, but we also noted a bit of ground fog starting to form. And by the time we stabilized on our final approach, the combination of fog density and the diminishing light served to obscure the runway. We tracked our manufactured electronic course and continued our descent in the hopes that the runway would appear ahead. The ground directly below was visible, but that is a classic aviation red herring. Slant range visibility is what's important. When it became obvious we were fighting a losing battle, Jim elected to break off the approach. "We're in the shit now, Mike," he said. No response from me. I knew we were in a jam. Maneuvering for the flight to Wynn Ranch and the subsequent abort of our approach consumed more fuel than anticipated. The only viable option was to return to our starting point and the tiny municipal runway. Its twinkling runway lights were in sight several miles beyond the fog bank that now blanketed the ranch runway. In my brief career as a professional pilot, I had not experienced anything approaching in the shit, but these things can change fast. My shirt started to dampen. Dark descended. To make matters more challenging, the parking lot lights of the shopping center directly across the street from the airport ominously showed faint haloing. It would be a race with fog. If we lost, we'd have to head northeast of town to make a crash landing in a thorny scrub alongside Highway 57. On the bright side, there wouldn't be much of a fire. As James Salter says in his book, Gods of Tin, The Flying Years, of his time as an F-86 pilot, when things do not go as planned, there comes a point when the fuel needle is all you think about. The Lear fuel gauge inched to the left. Big Jim Cook, then 65 years old, was not the picture of health. Fatigue from the long days showed on his face. The hard set of his mouth and the clench of his jaw radiated tension. He had often stated, either directly or through his many stories, sometimes you must fight the elements to stay alive. The hazy night and the light drowning influence of the adjacent shopping center rendered the runway lights difficult to make out as we closed in on the airport. Mike, use your eyes to help line me up for the approach. A reasonable person might ask, why didn't Jim hand over the controls to his co-pilot? Clearly, he was not at his best at this moment. But Jim was a relic from a time when co-pilots were seen and not heard. Gear up and shut up. The captain was God, and as Jim's apprentice, I was more vestigial than actual. I picked out the runway for him, directed him to a comfortable left-handed traffic pattern, and then I ticked through the landing procedure checklist. Jim lit up a Camel, as was his pre-landing practice. He never ceased to amaze me with the swift dexterity with which he executed this habit. We maneuvered into position on the left downwind leg, which paralleled the runway. Jim announced he had the runway in sight. The parking lot lights from the small mall to our right ticked by. The haloing effect still threatened fog. The moment was surreal. Is this a dream? We flew 5 miles downwind. Jim started a left-hand 180-degree turn. Having exhausted the drag chute option earlier in the day, Jim had to be on the money with his touchdown point on this postage-stamped 3,000-foot runway. Salter was right. I stared at the needle. What does fear taste like? Cottonmouth. But this was the perfect situation to prove myself, I thought, and to Jim, that I could be cool under fire no matter what happened, and even if survival was a misapprehended assumption. The cockpit was illuminated by the instrument lights. I had turned them way up to offset the profusion of shopping mall lights. The right side of Jim's face was in silhouette. His glasses reflected the cockpit lighting. Focus narrowed, he seemed to be a raptor intent on his prey. Jim opined about pilots who bragged about the extreme, even historic measures they had employed to extricate themselves from dire circumstances. His position was that pilots are guilty of creating their own difficulties. It's better not to put yourself in harm's way by using thoughtful, smart operating practice, thus negating the need to engage hero tactics to save the day. Such irony, I thought. Immediately after entering the left turn, Jim stated evenly, Mike, I've lost the runway. I need you to vector me in so I can make a right turn to final. Losing sight of the runway in a left turn didn't surprise me. Jim had lost sight in his left eye in the early 40s when he was a contract flight instructor for the Army Air Corps. In a bizarre incident, he fell out of an open cockpit of a biplane. His flight student had flattened out on the top part of a practice loop when they were inverted, and shockingly, Jim had not secured his harness. He pulled the ripcord of his parachute and drifted into a mesquite bush where a thorn pierced his left eye. A reasonable person might ask, why was he still flying? Good question. Locked into my role as trusty sidekick, I had to embrace the moment. Under normal circumstances, Jim could fly the Lear by himself. For him, a co-pilot was merely a regulatory necessity. Now, we desperately needed my help. Vectoring him will require precise and timely instructions. As commanded, I proceeded to vector or guide him to a right-handed downwind leg by giving him a series of headings that would allow us to make a right turn to final approach, where he could take advantage of his good eye. This required us to overfly the runway in the direction of landing, but continue beyond the airport boundary and then make a right turn back to the field for a downwind leg on the opposite side of the runway from where we started. The fuel gauge continued to unwind. I acted as an in-flight air traffic controller to put him on a perfect approach path. We turned a comfortable 5-mile final, enough time for him to take up a proper 3-degree visual glide pathway to the runway. We needed to touch down just beyond the green threshold lights to give us enough room to get stopped before we ran out of asphalt. "Runway in sight," Jim dryly intoned. We were ready, we were steady in the slot. The best one-eyed Learjet pilot, surely the one and only in the world, an extinguished Camel wedged between his throttle fingers, smoothly set the plane down within 100 feet of the runway with threshold. Jim got on the binders with intention. We stopped with 500 feet to spare. We taxied off the runway and parked in front of the ramshackle fuel office. I hopped out of my seat to open the door. Jim uncoiled his cramped frame from the closed confines of the Lear cockpit, then stepped out of the plane like Chuck Yeager after a tough mission. He massaged his temple and then lit a fresh Camel. "Mike, why don't you pour us a couple scotches? Let's relax a minute." Jim took a lusty drag from the fresh Camel. He let out a deep exhalation. "You've done good tonight." That was a tight one. We sipped our drinks, let the adrenaline ebb from our bodies. "Remember what I told you about maybe sometimes needing all your skills if you found yourself in a jam," he said, "and to avoid painting yourself in a corner?" He paused, raising a finger for emphasis. "Remember this night." I drove home. It was around 8 p.m. when I pulled into the driveway of our humdrum rental house. I hoped the girls had not yet gone to bed. When I walked through the front doorway, Becky and the girls were sitting on our old ratty couch, the ugly one with the brown and beige diamond-shaped patterns. My daughters ran over for a hug and a kiss, so cute and such a joy they were. Becky, peeved, testily asked, "Where have you been?" You didn't call to say you were going to be late." Still pumped from the evening's adventure, I responded, "Man, wait till I tell you." "You know, Mike, I don't care. The girls and I waited for dinner and for you, as usual." She looked tired, and although exasperation clearly dominated the moment, she paused. "But wait," I said, "wait till you hear the story. It was something. I really felt." "I don't care what you felt, Mike." Becky continued to vent. Her face, one that drew me in with a knowing smile and a raised bow, had contorted angrily. Tone deaf, I pleaded my case. "Hey, wait a minute. I just had a wild flight. Our backs were against the wall. We were in the shit. We had to screw it down tight. I came through in such a tough situation, proved myself." What you are proving to me, Mike, is that we don't matter. The shit that you're going on about is shit I don't care about. I think you're consumed with all things Jim. Clearly, I could not read the room. Wait, you got it all wrong," I said. Wait, you've got it all wrong. "No, you've got it all wrong," she said. "Jim is more important than we are to you." I was bailing as fast as I could, but my ship was sinking. No, that's not true. I'm just trying to make this thing work with him so it can work with us, so I can become great, so I can be somebody you can be proud of. Confidence is compelling. Whininess is not. "Mike," she said, "I've been proud of you. Making it with Jim Cook is not going to raise you up in my eyes. I happily signed up to follow you on your path wherever it took us, but I don't expect to play second fiddle to an old wreck of a man, especially one who tortures you." Becky got up from the couch with the girls in tow. "But don't you want to hear what happened?" "Nope." They disappeared down the hall. Silence followed them. Thank you. thank you so much for coming. It really is so important for writers to have people witness what they've done, and it's really, this is an important part of their celebration. So thank you so much for coming, and please give my writers another round of applause.